All right, so wanted to actually just talk about my opinions here about why I think the strategic position of China is incredibly poor and they don't have a good outlook. So what I have here is a campaign map of Japanese conquest up to 1942, and there's some missing parts here. So what this shows is just how weak the Chinese were and continue to be, by the way. You'll see it missing on the map, of course, is Japanese conquest of Indochina, Thailand, Burma, Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, and their eventual advance into India. You won't see included on this map their offensives in 1944, which expanded the Japanese reach into the Chinese hinterland, and the Ichigo offensive in 1945, which resulted in the Japanese basically breaking the back of the Nationalist Army. And some people have actually said that that campaign is what doomed the Nationalists to defeat in the Chinese Civil War. Now, the first thing you'll see is that, of course, Japan was able to get quite far into China. You'll see that they were able to take Beijing, to take Shanghai, and of course, if you take Shanghai, you cut the Yangtze River, and if you cut the Yangtze River, you pretty much cripple the ability of much of China to have access to the sea. Hong Kong is captured. Hainan, which is basically a Chinese aircraft carrier now, captured, and so forth. Now, the contemporary relevance of this is that you have to keep in mind that this was accomplished with all of the inherent limitations that the Japanese army had at the time. Very poor army in terms of tactics, very rudimentary artillery that really couldn't, even keep shells in stock. Limited armor, did not have a medium tank, for the duration of the war. Um, Obviously, incredibly powerful Navy and Air Force, especially in comparison to China, but definitely not a land power. So, the United States, in terms of its military, has managed to be both a naval and land power, and basically managed to do so by virtue of its geographic location. We don't have any enemies in the hemisphere that are able to cause any problems for us. Now, China has the same strategic problem, except it's magnified, right? So the issue with China is that it's got to both be a blue water navy to defend its territory, and it's got to have a great army to defend its territory. And obviously, you look around China and you have enemies. So you have Japan, you have Korea, you have Taiwan, you have the Philippines, you have Thailand, you have Vietnam, you have India, all right, and you have Russia. So again, the best way to mollify that is to, ally with the Russians and have them, cooperate with you, which is kind of what they've done. But there's going to be inherent tension. You can see Russia and China actually go to war with one another at various points in the 60s. There's border incidents. Of course, there's a Chinese-Indian war. There's repeated, obviously, attacks on Taiwan that are related to their disputes. Vietnam is an enemy. There was a war in 1975 in which the Vietnamese made them pay dearly just to take two northern provinces of Vietnam. So a lot of tension there. The South China Sea adventurism has cost them diplomatically in terms of what they can do with the Philippines. They're also at loggerheads with the Japanese over the same kind of thing. Um, North Korea is a proxy state of China. So part of that is to keep the Korean Peninsula from becoming united under Western or United States auspices, and that united Korea would be quite powerful, to be honest. So they're surrounded by enemies, and this was one of the big pushes behind the TPP. Contrary to what Trump said, he didn't even know what he's talking about. He's the actual TPP was slated to be an alliance of various countries around China economically. You might see a little bit of a redeployment in the economy in regards to not trading with China over the COVID thing. So that might kind of happen anyway, but it was basically just designed to encircle China economically and get our supply chain away from China. Um, so yeah, you'll see basically China has to deal with being completely surrounded by enemies, and they aren't pushover countries. So we've got Japan, which is third largest economy in the world, has a pretty competent military. You've got the South Koreans, you've got Russia, you've got India. So you have pretty substantial powers that are around China, whereas we just have Mexico and Canada, right? We have a system of alliances to back us up in Europe as well. So I think China is kind of a paper tiger in terms of the military, and obviously they're going to build up their navy and their military, and they're going to get to a point economically where they can afford to outspend the United States. And when that happens, of course, it's over. Basically, you can write off the American empire insofar as it has existed. But yeah, there's quite a lot of divisions in China itself. You can see this in their ethnic cleansing policies in their western provinces. They're trying to mollify that possibility, dilute Tibet as much as possible, and dilute the East Turkestanis to the point to where they can't resist. That's why they resort to pretty harsh measures there. Um, but their best military forces are actually concentrated in one province, Fujian, opposite of Taiwan. This includes their strategic missile force, a lot of cruise missiles, a lot of air force there. But there's they have such a huge gap to even close with us. They don't even have proper training for their pilots. Uh, Aviation fuel is a problem. It's just their military is a mess. It's quite tied up with a lot of the corruption. So you have PLA front companies just funneling money to their generals, stuff like that. Some of the recent purges are obviously related to that. It's trying to tighten up the way the military works and get a more professional force. A lot of what we would think of as military is paramilitary. They're got like tens of millions of paramilitaries in China that are trained, but they're basically internal security forces. And of course, when you go into a modern war, you're going to have your population. Um, Basically, your military force that you take to the battlefield is going to be the military force that you have to use. So if that's destroyed, let's say by American air power, which could literally sit off of the Philippines and stay out of range of all their missiles and just assault them. If your air force is destroyed on the ground, you don't have an air force anymore, and you can't build another one. All right. If your navy is sunk in port, you've got three major ports. You've got Tianjin, we've got Shanghai, and we've got one in the south. Okay, and you have no naval aviation because they really don't. Then you don't have a navy, and what are they going to do to defend themselves against landings and things like that? Not much. If your military is forced to take incredibly high losses, and then you have to draft your population, how much of the Chinese population is going to be familiar enough with weapons to actually have that work when they're disarmed? So it looks, the path for China clearly is an economic one. What they do in our current scenario is they just sit there, they don't challenge the United States for the next 10 or 20 years, and they build their military until they've got a good parity with us, and then maybe they take us on and defeat us once they have economic supremacy or economic parity with us. They do so. If they do anything before then, they get wiped out, and the regime in Beijing gets replaced through a popular uprising or something of the sort. However, um, the possibilities for such a replacement are not good for the United States either, um, because basically you would probably you'd either get a leftist leaning neo-Marxist, neo-Maoist really government, or you get a nationalist one, right? One that might seek more aggressive foreign policy, because the Chinese foreign policy has been quite conservative. So They've done things like border incursions past few decades. I mean, they did go to war with, several countries that I've indicated here. They did intervene in the Korean War, which was quite effective in preventing the United States from uniting Korea up to the Yalu. Um, they do not have a nuclear force that's capable of resisting the United States. They have less nukes than probably France, so it's a joke, quite frankly. Now, yeah, I mean, in terms of the Korean War, I mean, you can see the combat ineffectiveness of China, right? So there's a complete incapacity on a tactical level to really engage the United States. Once we learned what they were doing, yes, initially, Chosin Reservoir and other battles, they're able to infiltrate us and kind of encircle us. But once we figured out how they fought, it wasn't difficult for us to hold them off, which is why we were able to do so until 1953. So, pure numbers aren't going to do it uh, in terms of a modern war. And in fact, their missile strategy is area denial. So they want to keep us from being able to roll our navy up to the East China Sea and bombard them. So really, they have a bunch of ballistic missiles. Such a strategy has been unproven to defeat carrier battle groups. It's an open question whether that's going to work or not. It's an open question whether carriers are really as effective as we think. But given the ability to just deliver that much firepower into an area, I mean, we've only got a fraction of the Navy in the Pacific. Um, so obviously, if more of it was there, there'd be a huge problem for the Chinese. I mean, because you can look at it, and there's American bases all over. So we've got Saipan, we got Guam, we got Wake, and the more aggressive China is toward its neighbors, the more likely they are to ally with the United States to see us as a lesser of two evils. Because obviously, you can look at a place like Japan, you can say, well, they were occupied by the United States, and look how great they did, right? As opposed to being occupied by China, like North Korea, look where they are. That's pretty basic calculus. So, not that I would favor uh, going to war with China. I just don't think the discourse about China has any bearing on reality. Because when people talk about China taking over the world, they think it's like the next, yellow peril, and they think we're going to have a situation like we had with the Japanese with the surprise attack and all that, and then that's not going to happen. China's not that crazy. Um, that was some craziness from Japan, so it was uniquely Japanese in character. I got to tell you that much. So it comes out of the Meiji culture and their relationship with Bushido, and that's tied up with the Sengoku Jidai and all that, and that's uniquely Japanese. Doesn't have any bearing on how the Chinese want to do this. But one can only hope that never comes to pass. But that's just what I think.